Hi there, my name is Sheena, Sheena Dennise, and this is the first episode of Spiritual Therapy for the Aquarian Age. I'm really excited to invite you to the series. This is the first of many series, I will say, but I'm particularly excited for this talk that I'll be having with several people, first starting with myself with this episode on spirituality and faith, starting with the Black community and my community, and then extending out in the next season. So I'm really extending out to other communities. I should be specific. So I will be interviewing several people across industries and faiths and all intersections. So the idea is that this conversation around faith and spirituality, or spiritual therapy for the Aquarian age, will have many intersections, just as we all do, particularly focused around the Black community and the healing that has been happening, that needs to happen, and really delving into the many aspects, intersections, and representations of what faith and spirituality look like, first and foremost in the Black community. So I'm going to start with myself and then extend out to my immediate family, those who would be comfortable or those who I feel comfortable to reach out to have this conversation with. And then I will be extending further to Black leaders in their respective industries. So really everything from performance, music, education, law. We'll have so many people's and so many people's perspectives. It'll be you'll really want to be a part of it and to listen in and to see where you fit as well, because I feel like this is not something that's often talked about, and so I'm excited to have this conversation. I will say that you will see more of my personality as the conversations go on. And so I will be interviewing myself in this episode. And first, I'd like to, before I continue, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. Also, acknowledge that I am wearing a dress. So there's more happening down here. Anyway, just a little flirtatious moment for you. So I'd like to just take a moment, just take a deep breath and acknowledge my body in this space. In this space being One People TO, or One People Toronto. This space being my body in this chair. This space being the building, the land on which this building sits, the city of Takaranto, Toronto, the Indigenous caretakers of this land, the Indigenous ancestors who have birthed nations and souls who continue to take care of this land. Honoring, may we all just take a moment to honor and respect and revere the Indigenous ways of knowing and being in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, Turtle Island, extending to all communities across the world, to all the Indigenous communities everywhere, whether in Australia or in Ghana or in Thailand or in Peru or in Ethiopia or Zimbabwe or Russia or Ireland or the United States. So just invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the work that they have been doing, that they continue to do, and that wherever we are, if we are a settler, acknowledging our place and our responsibility to also do the work and to commit to truth and reconciliation, not just in Canada, but all across the world, and the ways in which you honor the Indigenous populations of your lands, of the lands in which you inhabit, or in the lands from your homeland. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to also acknowledge my own ancestors and teachers, calling in my angels and ancestors, spirit guides, and higher selves for their love, guidance, and protection for this episode. I thank you so much. I also acknowledge the ancestors that are present here in this lifetime, those that have passed on, whether I can name them or not name them. And I acknowledge their presence in my life and in my heart and in my DNA. So with that, I would like to again reintroduce myself. My name is Sheena, or Sheena Dennise. So the question is, and you'll get to know the questions fairly well, who are you? And so for me, my name is Sheena Dennise. I am a Black woman. I am a cisgender, queer Black woman. I am specifically bisexual. I love and appreciate both men and women and think there is magnificence in both, and am sexually attracted to both. And for a long time, I couldn't even say that or speak that. So this space that I'm holding is resilience and strength and resistance in itself. I am approaching my 40th decade in less than 2 years, so very exciting. As I mentioned, I identify as a Black woman, more specifically Caribbean descent, even more specific of Jamaican descent. I do have insight or knowledge that some of my blood or DNA is Ghanaian, so from Ghana, and or Nigeria. And I also think there is some Ethiopian background on my dad's side. So the Ghanaian, Nigerian aspect is from my mom's side. And so I haven't done the ancestry.com, or hopefully I would, or more specifically would do the African ancestry, but I haven't done that yet. So maybe in a later episode, we'll have this discussion where I get to reveal. But then, of course, there are so many other intersections and questions around that of giving my DNA to a company. I have no idea what they're going to do with. Anyway, that's a whole aside. How am I known? Wow, I'm known in multiple ways. So what does this mean? What do you do in your everyday? So full-time, I currently work in a university in an access to post-secondary education program. And what that means is, well, I'm a case coordinator. And what that means is I really essentially counsel students, mature students, students who are 21 up to 60 plus, who are returning to or accessing post-secondary for oftentimes what's the first or maybe this seventh time, and for whatever reason have had barriers to their education and to the support they've needed to facilitate their education, whether that's financial support, emotional support, even just guidance and direction. And so I will most often be kind of like a guidance counselor or resource, where I, listen to what it is that students are going through, whether they need academic accommodations, a referral to the counseling center, or financial aid, even just resources that are not available at the university, accessing, government assistance, whether it's OSAP helping them to, apply for applications, all kinds of things. That's what I do in my day-to-day, most specifically. If you could call it a full-time job, then that would be my full-time job, yes. Well, you could definitely call it a full-time job, so that would be my full-time job. I also would say I have another full-time job, though, and that is guiding and coaching people spiritually, emotionally, mentally, intellectually, in the fullest, most holistic and comprehensive way, using multiple tools. So whether that is Reiki, I'm a Reiki master teacher. I earned my level 1 and 2 in February of 2012, and then my master teacher level in September of 2013. I have been reading tarot cards for over 20 years. I am also a certified astrologer. I am a plant medicine facilitator, ceremonial facilitator. I am a writer, artist, sister, daughter, cousin, sister friend, granddaughter. I play all of these roles actively. I'm a space holder for people to grow and evolve and develop. I am a mirror. And so in all of these ways, I am a multifaceted being. And this is what I consider my calling. So showing up and representing myself in the most complex and yet authentic way. What have I done in my life that I'm most proud of? It would be opening One People Toronto, One People TO. I'll tag the Instagram and website below. Please follow if this is your first time becoming associated with One People TO. And spiritual therapy for the Aquarian age is really just an extension of One People TO. And what I've come to learn about my own healing, my own spiritual healing, and what I can share. And that is really my vocation and my calling. So, how and where did you first learn about faith and spirituality? For me, that was most directly in the family, in my immediate family, and from the church. So I grew up in the United Church of Canada and in two specific churches in Mississauga and Milton, Ontario. But the United Church was the grounding space in my faith and spirituality journey. My mom, to be honest, I think my dad's background is Presbyterian. My mom's background is Anglican, to be specific with the denomination of Christianity. There's a lot of information there for me coming through, but that's basically where I learned the foundation of faith and spirituality. And does this expression still resonate for you? Christianity specifically does not still resonate for me. I do still read certain Psalms, and I still have my Bible, the Bible that was given to me at the age of 10 by my grandmother. But this expression specifically of the association of the white Jesus to faith and spirituality for me does not hold or does not resonate for me. However, I do hold a deep respect for Christianity, for the lessons, for the teachings, and for the sustenance that it's provided for me and for my family. What did I learn about faith and spirituality when I was younger? Ooh, this is a big one. I learned that I feel like to be honest, I feel like I didn't learn enough about faith, that it wasn't, I feel like I learned more about my own faith through my own personal life journeys and to understand what faith really is for me. Spirituality, I feel like I learned that faith and spirituality as a whole was a structure, was not something that I felt like it was something that was outside of me, something that I needed to call in, something that I didn't know how to harness or wasn't taught how to harness. So the next question is, was there anything missing in that learning for you? I definitely feel like there has been a misunderstanding around, or a misconception or miseducation around what blasphemy is and what is considered blasphemous. As, for example, feeling like if I am a representation of God, or if I am made in God's likeness and God is white, then I'm not made in God's likeness. I am rather, in fact, the opposite of what God may be. This is how my interpretation had showed up. Because if God, or the representation of God is Jesus, who is, in my upbringing, blonde or sandy blonde and blue-eyed and, long hair, and my hair wouldn't go past my shoulders at a certain point, I'm brown skinned, brown eyed, even my eyes sometimes may look black. I am by definition black, and this representation of God has been white. And if I'm made in God's image, and I'm not, I don't represent, or I'm not represented, or if I don't identify with the representation of what God looks like, am I the opposite of God? Am I the Judas, so to speak? Because that is the representation of what is opposite of God. I feel like I wish I was told more that God is inside everyone, not just certain people. That was not blasphemous to believe. That if we are made in God's likeness, that God lives in each and every one of us, no matter what we look like, inclusive of what we look like. I feel like that would have held space for me when I didn't have space for myself, or couldn't hold space for myself. It's just reflecting if there's anything else missing in that learning. Definitely the background of, obviously, there's so much information around how Jesus, the birth story of Jesus is really representative of the birth story of Horus and Isis, and Madonna really representing, or being positioned as the representation, or the representation down the line of Isis. And from my own family's learning, or ancestral learning, how we as Black people fit into the conversation of Christianity, whether or not we do. Yeah. And so let's get into definitions. For me, how is faith different from spirituality? What does faith look like, and what does spirituality look like? And so faith is different from spirituality for me, in that every time I yawn, it's like I will say it's like a clearing, like I'm getting information or a download, clearing of my throat chakra, intuition being ready to be spoken. So how is faith different from spirituality? So faith to me is an everyday practice, a belief in something unseen, a knowing, a confidence, something that is unseen but palpable, like you can work with it. You know that it's something you can shore up. Faith is a belief, ultimately. Confidence. I come back to the space of confidence because it's a knowing. It's a trust. Faith is a trust in what has not yet come to fruition. Faith is a knowing that things will ultimately turn out to your benefit, no matter the hard struggles that you've been through. Faith is a trust in the unseen, in the ever evolving story that is life. And that knowing that if it's not good, then it's not done, and that there's always the up and down, there's always the riding of the wave, and trusting the riding of the wave. That is the faith. That's what faith is to me. How is it different from spirituality? Well, for me, spirituality is more of a practice of how you practice your faith. I love what we hear in the silence, what we need to hear. Faith, spirituality versus faith. Spirituality to me is, yes, more of a practice, is more of a, how does your faith show up? What are the things that you need to do to call on your not to call on your faith, to hone your faith, to distill your faith, to again shore up your faith. And so spirituality to me is the acts or the practices that help you to tap into your faith. And so for me, spirituality looks like accessing my tools, whether that's accessing my intuition, using my dreams as a resource, recording my dreams, coming back to them at a later date for more information, using things like plant medicine, whether that's psilocybin or cannabis or ayahuasca. I've had that experience. Kambo has been another experience, Sangana. And of course, having other non-psychedelic or plant medicine experience, but using energy. So Reiki, tarot cards have, yes, like I mentioned, have been a long since part of my practice. Astrology as well. Definitely therapy would fall under here for me as well. Yoga, although I haven't been practicing as much recently. Meditation for sure. I would say I prefer to use Reiki as opposed to just a guided meditation, because Reiki helps me to induce meditation in a way that is not readily accessible in traditional meditation. Anything else? Just thinking. And of course, food. Food and how I feed myself, how I nourish myself, how I take care of myself is also an act of spirituality for me. And so drinking, what I drink, what I consume, what I take in, the content, whether social media, if I happen to watch a Netflix show, I'm very selective with those types of things. I don't watch TV or the news very often. I don't have cable. I haven't for over 10 years. So being very intentional with what I take in and consume is another act of spirituality for me. As well as, and long since has been in my personal life and now extending because I have the space of one people, even in my client work as well, addressing injustices, supporting communities that have been traditionally marginalized. So whether that's the Black community, the queer community, developmentally delayed, or those with mobility issues, those with mental health conditions. I've always been advocates for these spaces and communities, perhaps I'm sure because of my own personal intersections. But even for those who, anyone who has been the underdog has been there's something to learn there. That's what I know. And so wanting to support and hold space for these communities, those people that may not have space holders in their lives. What does faith look like for you versus spirituality? So like I said, faith for me is a sense of confidence, or a belief in the unseen, and a way of, taking one step at a time to, even if it's just, again, in faith, it's like that Martin Luther quote about, not seeing the whole staircase, just taking the first step. And then from the next step, you see a little light on the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And so, being able to spiral, even if you feel like at times you come back to the same conversation, the same question, being able to look at it from a different vantage point, from where you were when you were down at this part of the spiral, and now you're up here at this part of the spiral, even if it's the same conversation, or it feels like it's the same conversation. And so as I say that, faith for me is this awareness that we're always on the journey, and that we're always going to receive insight and clarity, and knowing that even when we feel like we don't know what we're doing, we always know what we're doing. We're always feeling guided, or there's always like a knock on the door kind of saying like, come on, let's go this way. Are you listening? Are you listening? Let's go this way. And so faith to me is listening to that knock. Faith is listening to that knock and saying like, I have no idea what I'm doing or why I'm going this way, but I need to go this way, and following the guidance of like, bye, I'm off the screen, like that. And not feeling the need to explain, but following the joy and following the faith. That's what faith looks like for me. So a few more questions. My spiritual evolution, and how has my faith changed or deepened? And it's interesting because I was a very willing participant in the church. I was confirmed as soon as I was confirmed at the age of 13, where of course my mom I think it was a very big thing for her, and a big celebration. We had cake, family members came, my best friend and her sister came, community members, family friends and that sort of stuff. And I officially became a member of the United Church of Canada, and I wanted the little envelope so I could contribute and give my tithes. And I think maybe I gave once, once or twice. And I remember the next year they didn't ask if I wanted any envelopes, and then they didn't ask. I'm sure it costed more to print them out than I gave. And so part and parcel of this conversation is that 3 years later, the church that I was a part of was really needing to undergo repairs. And because it was a church from, before the 20th century, so built in the 1800s, and this being, I guess, the late 1990s, they really needed renovations to be had. And at this point, when you're thinking about a heritage space or a heritage home, or the capacity of renovating or retrofitting a building, a church, with the wheelchair access and all of those sorts of things, or a stair lift, or having to renovate certain parts of the building. And the church ended up being divided between rebuilding, the newer community, the younger community wanted to rebuild, and the older community, the more mature community, the establishment of the community, the establishment wanted to rebuild, just renovate and keep as much of the structure as possible. And there ended up being basically a case of arson. And the outcome was that the community, the congregation, was divided and into 3 different parties, essentially. There were the people that wanted to remain in the church, many of whom have remained. This, of course, has been like the established members, the establishment of the church. The younger community members ended up, diverting elsewhere. And then I think there was this third group, and myself being a part of this group, this third entity, where they wanted to find something new and something maybe that wasn't represented, and to edge away from either side. I think at a certain point, there were people that came up in the middle that said that I don't want to be a part of either group. I don't want to be a part of this division. And for me, it was this realization that at that point, church was more than a building. Church was like right inside my heart, and in my being and soul, and how I am every day, and how I show up for myself and how I show up for people. And so around that time, around the age of 16, I stopped. That was around the time that I got my first deck of tarot cards. And it made me realize that there were so many flaws in the church that especially at that time, again, late 1990s, that people didn't want to address, whether it was, for myself, I was not even out at that time. And even though, I will say, of any church, I feel privileged to be a part of, still officially a member of the United Church of Canada, because they're one of the first, churches to accept women as ministers. And then 2, to not wrong people for being queer. Although, of course, there are so many evolutions of what that represents, but being one of the first spaces where, people could be openly gay, or bisexual, or whatever their expression is, and still having space for that, or being accepted. And so at that time, I edged away from the church and really started to delve into my own representation of faith and spirituality. And I really did edge away from, and have only recently come back to this ability or capacity for the word God in my life, because to me that represents a man, a white man that does not respect me because of the affiliation of external situations, or the historical context of the white male, black female dynamic. So do you mind sharing why that change occurred? I shared. Do you I will say, do you speak about your faith and spirituality? I do now. For a long time, I didn't. For a long time, I was still navigating what my faith and spirituality is, what it looks like. I don't really have a name for it exactly. I'm not sure if I need a name for it. But I do now speak about my spiritual tools. And I will say, I don't speak, now that I think about it, I don't speak as much about my faith because I'm conscious that it sounds like it's I don't want it to sound or come off as like bragging because of that conversation between, is it faith or is it confidence? And I'll post, I'll repost it, this faith or confidence post that I had posted last year in preparation for opening the One People to Yo space. Because for me, the One People to Yo space was very much a drive of faith. It was not a confidence. It was something that I felt like I had to do. I was being called to do. I was not supported with in the grand scheme of things, for whatever reason. And that's not blame or shame. That's just what people were able to hold for me at that time. The vision and so faith, I don't speak as much about because it sounds like it's more of a confidence or like, how do you know? And that I don't want to have to get into, and into anything that will drain the energy of what it is that I'm creating or manifesting. And so it depends, maybe now I can speak about the faith and spirituality that's connected to One People to Yo. But when it was in the cultivation space, and I will say there is still cultivation because there are moments where I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to pay the rent or, the hydro or, bring in the next client or keep building what I'm building without having certain frameworks in place. And so there's still conversations around that. And anytime I'm in the creation mode, I'm very careful not to share. But it's also the awareness that when we're building, we do need a team. We do need the village, just like when we're raising a child, even though I'm not a mother. I am raising this entity called One People to Yo, where I'm holding space for, several dozens of people, inadvertently or directly, indirectly. And so wanting to do that responsibly and with intention for them and the people that are associated with the space, but also for myself and what I need to be able to hold the space to be able to continue to provide this. That felt like a mouthful. So the last few questions, what's in my spiritual toolbox? So I mentioned a few of what my go-to tools are. Most definitely Reiki. I'm a Usui Reiki master teacher. Astrology, tarot cards, magic, plant medicine, plants and plant medicine. So again, whether it's, cannabis, psilocybin from mushrooms, ayahuasca, Kambo, Sangana, even outside of those medicines, even just using medicines like, so I'll sage, because I didn't sage at the beginning, but sage, which is a spiritual practice from most specifically the North American indigenous population. There are other medicines that I use, like, I will say I don't often use sweetgrass, but cedar, copal, incense for sure. I'll even just burn things like lavender, herbs, so lavender, rosemary, thyme, using essential oils for sure. And again, really incorporating anything that I consume in into my practice, and infusing that with the love and energy that I have within inside me, whether that's like using Reiki intentionally or just, taking time and love to prepare my food. If I do order out, being intentional with where I'm ordering, what I'm eating, who I'm sharing that time with, who I'm sharing any time with. Um, and then, of course, other things like writing, creativity, painting, drawing, um, crafting. I used to make a lot of jewelry, so bracelets and um, pendants that I could wear. So a lot of, oh my gosh, crystals, absolutely. So I always have some crystals that are protecting me that I'm using in my practice, and candle magic, candle work. So many things. But these are all, not all of the tools, but definitely many of them. And then, of course, like I was mentioning, having plants in my space, that's definitely a connection that I've gleaned, that I've learned from my grandmother, and of course my own mother as well. But having that foundation from my grandmother and what she has taught me um, is a lot of. So numerology would also fall under there. Her connection to the stars, which has become my connection to the stars, and listening. Listening is one of my main tools. I'm a very keen observer, and I like to observe and ask questions if people are open. And so I will observe my own energy and other people's energy and what it is that where they show up, and if I can, yeah, activate something within them. And I often tend to do that, whether it's intentional or not. So what is up next for you in this realm of learning, spirituality, faith, and self-development? That's a good question. That's a good question, Sheena. I am interested in a new energy modality. It's interesting. I have been interested in doing, it's interesting because I have been interested in doing reflexology. I had a conversation with a friend. However, I am mindful that the exchange of energy is different when I'm doing Reiki as opposed to when I would be doing reflexology, because I would be receiving their energy as opposed to sending energy. And so rather than being the conduit, I would be the receptor. And I'm not sure that I want to do that, but I would like to be able to deepen and hone my creative and intuitive abilities. So on a formal level education, I'm finishing my undergrad in psychology after many, many years. You don't want to, I'll tell that story at some point for sure. And so maybe there'll be another solo conversation or check-in. And I'd love to hear your feedback about just anything that's come up for you in this episode. So after I finish my undergrad, that I'm expecting that to be next year in psychology, my honors, I have been reflecting on doing my master's in art therapy or some kind of play therapy, to be able to offer this to, first and foremost, the Black community and those who may not have the ability to access these types of therapeutic experiences without it being covered. Even sometimes when it is covered, but yeah, being able to share and tap into that inner child that we most often have not had space for, haven't been able to experiment or play with because of the the parentification that happens most often for Black children. If you don't know what parentification is, look it up. So my faith message, if you could share a message about faith, what would it be? You always know where you want to go, moment to moment. As Esther Hicks would say, that's something I didn't mention. I do love spiritual thought leaders that help me to expand my mind. Esther Hicks, Jerry Hicks, Abraham Hicks being one of those entities. And so it reminds me something, I'm paraphrasing, but something that she would say or they would say. And so this is much more around allowing yourself to be guided to what feels better. Even in the most sorrowful, lonely, sad, desolate places, just finding just that little space of ease, just a little bit of space where you can just take a little bit more space, just a little bit more space. So whether that's in community, and even if there's nobody that can hold space for you, learning what it means to hold space for yourself. That is the biggest lesson that I've learned in my own spiritual journey. Because so oftentimes we feel like we are alone, and we may be alone indeed in so much of our journey. And so not resenting that, but learning to roll around and relish that space of learning and quiet. And learning to love yourself in that space. Because it's work, but it's worth it. It's going to be commercial, but you're worth it. Commercial-esque, but you are worth it. But you are worth it. Yes, you are. And so am I. And so I can't even tell you the journey that I've been on that has brought me to this space, but you will come to find out. And you may be amazed. I am certainly amazed. I'm just happy to literally have gotten to this space and time where I can share my story in a more full way. I have so much more to share, but I will keep it there. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to, with all due respect, because remember, I am holding space for many people, and I'm holding space for you in ways that you don't even realize. So feel free to send your questions or comment below, but with all due respect. Don't make me come after you. Sending you so much love and light and blessings. I hope the summer of 2020 continues to be enlightening for you. And may you find the spaces of ease and gentleness where you can, because we're not going back to any kind of normal. We're changing things. And so how are you being a part of that change? Do you want to be a part of that change, or do you want to be on the sidelines and waiting to be told what the changes are? Interesting, right? Sending you so much love and light and blessings. I appreciate you. I appreciate your presence, who you are in this lifetime, and whatever it is you feel that you've come to do, because we all have a role. We all have a role. What is your role? Let me empower you. Do not be afraid to be activated. Blessings. Always.